This is Groundeffected. My name is in fact your dad. If you don't believe me, just ask your mum. In this video, I'm going to take you through my entire process of how I make my models, and this one might be a little bit different, so stick around for something slightly different. There will still be a lot of and that's just how it goes. Thank you for coming, great cooperation. This is the current project that I'm working on, and this is obviously a Venom, as you can probably tell by the fact that it looks like a Venom. These are the parts. This is not all the parts. I'm still missing 2 more base bits, which are actually in fact in my machine. And speaking of machines, I currently am using the Uniformation GK2. I do have 2 of these machines which I absolutely adore. They are amazing. They have saved me all throughout winter, even though I will explain something else about the heat in a second. Right next to my Uniformation, I have my Frozen Sonic Mighty 8K. Amazing machine. I love this machine. It does struggle in the winter because it doesn't have a heater, which is exactly why I have a little heater on the shelf here, especially when I'm doing big projects like this, where I need to get a lot done in a very short space of time. And that was particularly for the Hulk that I did last week, where I had to have the entire gang just going at it like they've never gone at it before. Now, as you can tell, the rest of the parts on these machines are ready to come out. So I'm going to take these out. Once they're out, we will get over to some curing, and I'll show you how I go through my curing process. So when it comes to cleaning, I don't actually use anything fancy. I don't use any of those cleaning washing stations. Perhaps they would help me. I don't really know. This is the method that I've been using. I have got washing stations. They just feel like they're in the way all the time. This is in fact the boxes from those washing stations themselves. I feel like it's just easier to chuck it into the alcohol. I let it soak for a couple of minutes, sometimes an hour or 2. Depending on the type of resin, you can't let it soak for too long because it might actually melt the resin or make it go all soft and weird. I use sunny resin, and this is pretty much all I do. I just leave it in here and I just give it a good old shakeroonie, and eventually it will get all the residual resins off of it, which then I can then leave it to dry. So here is where I leave everything to soak or dry. I mean, it's already soaked over there, but then I leave it here to dry, and usually this takes a couple of hours. You can speed this up using a hairdryer. Also, probably you can take off some of those if you really want. Maybe you shouldn't be touching it because you might get some kind of cancer. I don't know. I don't really care too much about that. I try not to eat this stuff. But back to what I'll do now is I'm going to take these parts and I'm going to get them cured off, because they need to be finally cured, because they're not actually fully cured just yet. And for this, I actually have a couple different solutions. An Elegoo friggin' light curing machine jobby, and on this bad boy I'll usually put about 6 minutes ish, and I might flip him over and do another 2 or 3 minutes on the other side just to make sure it's all done. But that is number 1 for the option. Now let's take this tray down to the other option, which is in fact this Nova 3D curing machine situation, which I find to be quite the delight. It looks like a microwave, and that's pretty cool. I like microwaves. And basically all I'm going to do is just place in as many parts as I can actually really fit inside of it. Without, obviously, you don't want to like pile them on top of each other. You kind of need some free space around them for them to breathe. Otherwise, the light's not going to get to all of the parts, and it's not going to cure very well. On this machine, I'll do a similar thing. This one, I put it up to the highest setting, and I also usually do about 5 minutes on each side, and I will flip those parts later. I use this one and the Elegoo in the back. Now, obviously, in order to 3D print, you need some kind of a confuser, and for me, the confuser that I use is this Ace thingy-majiggy-mabobbies. I have no idea what it does, why it does it. All I know is that when I look for a computer, I look for something that is good for gaming, basically. Because if it's good for gaming, it should be able to handle the graphics that you need to be able to render certain things when it comes to large files and stuff. A good computer is definitely going to help you in that situation. You don't need any extra screens. If you're using a laptop, this is terrible to be supporting parts with, so you need one of these. As you can tell, mine is full of paint because I work right within my painting area. So paint gets everywhere. My computer gets full of paint. People have told me, please clean your screen. And I'm like, bruh, I cleaned it 5 minutes ago, and within 2 minutes it will be covered in paint dust and dirt, and it's just how it works in a studio where you're painting all the time. So now that I have everything cured, it is time for me to obviously start building this model. But before we start building this model, what I want to do is put it together roughly and figure out, am I going to need to fill some gaps? I already know I'm going to need to, because I had to print the base in 3 parts. So when I put these bits together, there is going to be some very solid lines. I'm going to need to put this model together to check that fitment and everything goes exactly according to plan. And once I'm done with that, we'll have a look what we need to fill with gaps wise, and we'll move on to that. A couple of obvious things stand out to me. Again, like I mentioned already, the base is definitely going to need some filling, and normally I would glue a lot of my models together, especially because of the time frame that I work on. So I think my main focus for the next few minutes is going to be putting this base together and filling all the gaps on the base, and then I'll put his body together and fill the gaps on the body, and then we'll start getting him ready for primer. So I think what I've decided is that I did place holes here already to put magnets. Obviously these holes are really good for clearing out the resin that's inside of these parts. So a lot of people, I have had comments in the past where people have said that there could be trapped resin inside of my models, and I agree with you, but also at the same time I use massive holes and a lot of small holes as well, just to make sure that I can really get in there to clean it out. And I do soak my models for quite a while, so I haven't really had any of that problem. In 3.5 years of painting and printing stuff, I still have models from back then, and not one of them have leaked. So maybe you're just not cleaning your models if you're having leaking issues. That aside, let's talk about the magnets. I did make a 10mm hole when I supported these parts in lychee, which means in theory that a 10mm magnet should fit in that hole. The most important thing is that 10mm does not fit into 10mm. So if you wanted to make it an exact fit, you probably needed to make the hole like 10.1mm for a 10mm magnet to fit in. I like it to be this tight, however, because I have one tool that is an exact size for making this hole to fit a 10mm magnet. And I can't actually tell you where to get this tool from. All I know is that it is a stainless, non-magnetic pair of tweezers. And basically, the back of this thing fits extremely perfectly into one of these holes. And all I have to do is turn it like this. And once I've turned it a couple of times, it makes the hole nice and round for me. And it also then fits a magnet very snugly into that hole, almost as a press fit. I will probably still have to glue this because I don't think it'll work just as well. If you look very carefully, you can see the marks that were left over from supporting. There will be some on where the fingers were supported as well, but it's not as visible because there's quite a lot of texture on this model. It will be visible when we paint it, however, so I just want to go through and maybe just sand this just to make sure that the fitment is really good when it goes back into its hole. And we could make sure that this gap is just a little bit less by just sanding up a little bit inside of here. If I'm being totally honest, you could probably spend actually hours really working on making sure that this joint fits really nicely. But in my opinion, this is going to be perfectly fine for what it is. Yes, you will definitely see the seam, but the fact that I'll be able to take his arms off, at least to transport him, will definitely make me feel a lot better than keeping this massive model together and trying to transport this thing where I'm going to probably end up breaking fingers and stuff. So I'm going to do it this way, and that's just how it's going to have to be. when you are doing magnetizing of your model, something that will save you a lot of time, just do this. Just trust me. If you want to have problems, don't do this, but just do it. Stick the magnets back onto the part that you're sticking in so that you know exactly which side has to go in the other side. If you don't do this and you just use this magnet, you're going to forget which side is which, and you're going to stick the wrong side in one day, and it's so difficult to get these out once you've got them in without destroying the model completely. When this pile of magnets is very small, it's actually really difficult to get it into like gaps and stuff like that where you can't get your hands into. So it actually really helps to have the additional magnets, but also they're available for me to use on other smaller parts. But also for one other big thing, when I do test the direction of the magnets, then all I have to do is pull it off, knowing that this is the side that needs to go there. When I pull that off and put it there, I can only put that in the right way. Maybe that helps, I don't know if it helps, but this is one way that I try to keep direction of the magnets, because obviously it won't go in there. It means it has to go in the other side. It can't stick together, but it can stick together that way. So hopefully that helps. So what I did to fill these gaps was I took some resin and I put it in with a brush, a paintbrush, over every little gap where there was, and then I just cured it with the curer. I have a little UV curer light. If I put it in this angle, you can literally see how it has been filled. But realistically, that already pretty much solved most of the problems. But I'm going to go back in and I'm going to add some texture back to where it is a little bit not textured. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use this technical Armageddon dust from Citadel. But basically this is just sand mixed into your paint, so you could probably do that too. Okay, so now that I have put a coat of primer all over it, you can see, I mean, it is genuinely so difficult to see where that, at least this one, there was another one that went down here, all the way through here, that came all the way through this stuff here too. You can't really see that. And then on the back, what I'm hoping with this different style of video is to maybe give you more of an overview of the entire process, or I don't really know how to actually show you how much work actually goes into making one of these things, and also just exactly what goes on. A lot of people ask about my studio and all sorts of things, so hopefully some of this gives you some information about that too. I don't really know, but I'm trying things. YouTube is a very strange place. It's tough to make it as a small creator, and trying things is a very important thing, I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know anything. But I'm painting this statue, and stick around with this video if you want to see how it ends up turning out. After leaving to dry, it is now time for me to obviously start painting this model, and again, I'm pressed for time. This is starting to become a theme of my life, but I'm just going to work with it, and in order to really speed this up, I'm going to just get some texture out of this base by giving it a dry brush. Basically, this is kind of like slap chop, but on a large scale. Essentially what I'm going to do is not so white dry brush, and then a very white dry brush to catch some of those edges, and after that I'm going to use transparent paints in the form of shades and contrast paints from Citadel, and I'm going to spray those over the top of this rock. Now, I don't actually really think about anything when I'm doing this, other than there needs to be different colors in different areas. You don't want one overall blue rock and then try to put a little bit of brown in it, because that's going to look weird. You want to make sure there is some variation of color all the way through the rock. That is the most important thing I could say. After I've done that, I'll let it dry, and I'll give it another dry brush one more time, and come back in with, I think it was a Drakenhof Nightshade Blue, and I'll just darken some of the shadows, and this is the results of something like that. This was super fast, probably took me no more than 20 minutes, maybe, max. After that, it was time to start working on some of the details that are on the space. As you could tell, I just went balls to the wall and painted the whole rock as if everything on this base was a rock. This is because later on I can come back and pick out some of those parts and paint them individually. Starting with the sewer, I painted it with one of the dark silvers and realized later on that this was the wrong color, but let's not talk about that right now, and let's talk about the goo or the venom that is all across the base, that's kind of like stretching all over the place. I painted this with the matte black, just the plain black from Vallejo. This black is one of my favorite blacks because it mixes really well with water and spreads very far. It was at about this point that I did realize that I'd painted the stupid sewer the wrong color. And the thing that I did to fix that was take the right color, which in my case was the copper from Monument Hobbies. And once I had painted that very roughly over the top of this, leaving quite a bit of the undertones with it, I airbrushed a Reichland Flesh shade to give it some shadow. Now for that goo on the base, I went in with the blue, and I have decided that with this entire model, I'm gonna go with the comic book feel of Venom, and he usually is blue. In the comics, they usually give blue highlights to black characters, because if it was just a boring comic, it would just be black, and I don't like boring black comics, so I wanted to make a nice happy blue comic, and this is where we're at. I realized that there was a bit of corrosion and stuff on the sewer, and in order to take care of that, I just used some rust effects from Army Painter. I don't know if it's an effect, but I think it says effect on the bottle of the paint. Once I was done with that, I used some darker wash, I think it was Agrax Earthshade, to push some of the deeper crevasses before turning to the inside of that drain pipe and giving it some form of toxic. It obviously has to be something toxic coming out of the drains, because we're in a comic book land, and obviously the ugly toxic stuff in the drains probably has something to do with the story. I don't know. I just felt like it made sense. There was a glow in the reference images, and I felt like that it was glowing because there's toxic inside of it, and that is my story. Hope you liked it, and let's get back to the rest of the base. At this point, it was time for me to throw a very glossy clear over all of the parts, but at this time I also made a mistake, which I will refer back to in a few minutes. Before that though, let's speak about how I approached the Venom himself. And yes, I basically made him blue, all of him pretty much blue, because I felt like I didn't want him black. I said this already, and I'm very happy with my choices, but during that process I did block up my airbrush and have to clean it out, which I'm pretty sure there is many of you watching this video with a clogged airbrush right now. This is your reminder to clean out your airbrush and not leave paint in it overnight. But back to painting Blue Venom, I realized he was too blue, so to bring some of that black back into him, I used black contrast, which is not very black. It's kind of bluish, actually, to be totally honest, especially when you thin it down. And I sprayed that just into his shadows, and also shaped a lot of his muscles with the same blue black from contrast paint from Citadel. I don't remember the name. Okay, so I have made a bit of a mistake. I've just spoken to Zez, and after speaking to Zez and looking at the reference photos, I realized that there's a reason why there's bubbles here and not slimy bits like that, because it's clearly not. It's something that's come out of this thing. So basically I'm a schmuck, and now we need to fix this. So I might just give it a coat of white and then put some red over the top, because I'm gonna probably put a red glow in here so that I can juxtaposition all the colors of all the things, and let's get back to doing that. And while I paint this red goop coming out of here, I would just like to mention that someone that I know had mentioned to me to use red as a highlight on this model, and I thought that was an absolutely silly idea, which is why I decided to use it as my secondary light on the side of the model instead. What I'm trying to go for here is not the boring blue man that just stands in the middle of a rock. So by adding a separate color, which in fact actually in the original images is a green, which would have worked pretty well, I think, probably. But I don't like to do anything that everybody else is doing, and I like to do my own thing sometimes. And in this case, it made sense that perhaps the little alien capsule on the base was containing something like a carnage. We don't know this, I don't know this, nobody ever knows this, but I painted it in this way because I felt like maybe it added more to the story, but more importantly it gave me a reason to add red as a second color, which would then contrast against the blue, because in theory I'm actually kind of using orange in the real colors, edges of the colors of the red, so it's so hard to explain, but basically orange and blue are composing colors on the color wheel, make things stand out, contrast, primary color, words that artists understand and know, and pretty much magic. So yes, I used red and the blue, but the red light turns to an orange light, which means that the orange is actually the contrasting color, which contrasts against the blue, which makes everything stand out. Hopefully that makes any sense, because it didn't even make sense coming out of my mouth hole. Never mind anything about a mouth hole. Let's talk about the LEDs that are stuck into this little capsule. I obviously printed this in transparent resin because otherwise I wouldn't be able to put LEDs in it. I then took some red LEDs and just glued them in. I literally super glued them in. I didn't give any care towards how this went in. I just super glued them into place and soldered them all together. It looks like absolute mess inside there, but don't worry about it. I poured resin into it and cured that so that I never have to see it again. So I don't worry about it, you don't worry about it. Let's just paint the outside of it. The one thing that I have a problem with painting LED or light up stuff is that it always bloody shines through and it drives me nuts. So I have to paint many layers. I do find, however, metallics do seem to help with hiding that. In this case, because it's probably cracking open, I guess a little bit of light leaks, not the absolute end of the world, and I gave it a bit of a OSL, which is the fancy term or shortened words for object source lighting, so that when it was off, because trust me, the only time the battery is ever in and on is when I show you guys these models. After that, they never have a battery in them ever again, so I paint them to look like the lights are on even when the lights are not on. On the hands, he has some patches. And this is the correct way of doing Venom. He has to have patches on the hands. Thank you, Zez, for adding the patches on the hands. Speaking of Zez, Zez is obviously and very clearly the sponsor of this video again, because Zez is a very wonderful Patreon that offers up models just like this, and they sponsor artists like myself, which is an amazing thing for them to do. And what you should now be doing is checking out the description so you can go and see the rest of their models that Zez has made, and maybe perhaps subscribe to their Patreon and join the Zez crew of quality models. Back to painting Venom, you can tell that I've obviously painted the deck tan into all the places that needed to be white, and that is because I like deck tan as a color because it covers everything very well, easily, most times. Not all the time, but most times it does do that. Also, there is a couple of people who watch my channel and play a game called the deck tan drinking game, and the more times I say the word deck tan, the more they have to drink, so I'm just helping them with their habits. Deck tan. After I had painted the deck tan, I gave that a shadow with a contrast paint, the same one that I used before that I couldn't remember the name of. It's that one. And I sprayed that into all the shadows of the deck tan on the model. I then used Magos purple and literally just painted that over the white that I had painted in his mouth, and I used Skeleton Horde contrast paint to dirty up his teeth, because Venom doesn't have white teeth. They have to be dirty, gross, ugly teeth, otherwise it's not the real Venom, trust me. It's just the way it has to be. After I'd done that, before I allowed that paint to dry fully though, I'd started already painting deck tan over the top of it. This does some sort of a wet blend and helps to really seal the deal between the blending of the dirty and the clean parts. I then highlighted the tips of the teeth and also came back in with a bright pink and highlighted around his mouth and a couple of spotty highlights on the sides of his tongue. I also sprayed the entire Venom with a gloss clear coat and called the model done. I hope that this video gave you some inspiration or even just some insight into how to paint, or how I at least paint my 3D printed resin printing models. And or if not, maybe it was just a great time for you on the toilet. I would like for you to click the like button, because apparently that helps the channel. Leave some words at the bottom in the little square box that YouTube gives you to leave some words, and perhaps subscribe to me so that I can have one more new subscriber. This is also a great time for me to thank my patrons, because without them these videos would not be existing ever. And thank you very much, patrons, for all of your patronage and keeping the lights blinding my eyeballs. If you didn't like anything that you saw in this video, I genuinely don't care. You can leave your words below, I don't even care about that. But now is a good time for you to kindly fuck off.